So this Thursday is a hugely important day for our country and for all those who live here. The day of the general election. The Church is not in the business of telling us how to vote, but it reminds us again and again of the importance of actually casting our vote. The Catholic bishops of England and Wales issued a statement about the election last month. We put this on Facebook and some of you have seen it, I hope. They said that Catholics cannot simply, quote, watch from the balcony. We can't watch from the balcony. And they continued, conscious of the common good of every person and our society as a whole, we ask everyone to engage with the election and vote. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church is even stronger about this point. It says that citizens of any country have a co-responsibility for the common good. And part of that co-responsibility is the moral obligation to exercise the right to vote. It's a strong language, isn't it? That's paragraph 2240. You can look it up later if you want to. And a few weeks ago, in the spirit of this, I encouraged you to register to vote while you still had the time. So now I'm encouraging you even more strongly to exercise your right to vote this Thursday. And to vote for the person and the party you believe will best promote the common good, which includes the good of every person, the good of our country, our continent, the global community to which we belong, and the natural environment on which we all depend. The bishops of England and Wales wrote, "Citizens have a duty to emphasise and help shape a politics rooted in the service of human rights and peace. The test of any policy should be its impact upon human dignity, particularly for the most disadvantaged in our society." You're voting, in other words, not for self-interest, or for tribal loyalty, or for an ideology. You're voting not just out of habit or impulse. You're voting because you believe it's still possible to build a better society, a society that cares for the needs of all, where every person can flourish, and one person's well-being is not won at the expense of another's. There is an idealism here, yes, a hope that things can be better. This is the vision of the prophet Isaiah in the first reading today. The wolf lives with the lamb. The panther lies down with the kid. Calf and lion feed together with a little boy to lead them. They do no hurt, no harm on all my holy mountain, for the country is filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters swell the sea. So yes, we should be a little bit idealistic. But Christian teaching is also very pragmatic. Our duty as citizens is not to find the perfect candidate or the perfect manifesto. There is probably no such thing. We are looking at those people whose names are actually on the ballot paper and deciding as far as we can who seems to be the best. A desire for perfection in politics, paradoxically, often leads to cynicism. You end up staying away or spoiling your ballot paper because no one comes up to your high expectations. Well, remember, politics is the art of the possible. And remember again that phrase I have quoted many times to you before: the perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So we need a certain realism. We need to think, to read, to talk, to reflect, to pray, and then to make the best decision we can. Different Christians may have different political opinions. You can have two good people, both seeking the common good, both acting with great personal integrity, who come to very different conclusions. What matters is that each person is trying to follow their conscience and to live by the truth as far as their limited vision allows them to see it. This is the vocation of St. John the Baptist in the Gospel today, to speak the truth as he saw it, to risk the scorn of his neighbours, to risk the wrath eventually of King Herod, to give his life for truth and to follow his conscience, and to call others to follow their consciences, whatever the cost. This isn't always easy, not even in the small things. We can be very, very conflicted. Let me give you one small, personal, not a political example. One day when I was a student, your age, I was rushing through the town centre at my university at lunchtime. I saw a homeless person collapsed on the ground in front of me. I don't mean sitting on the side, slightly out of it. I mean collapsed on the ground in front of me, in the middle of the town square. I was distracted and didn't have time to think, so I just stepped over him. I don't mean I walked around him politely. I literally stepped over this man and walked on. It was about 10 steps further on that I began to process what had happened, as you do. I kept walking, but there was a weight within me, like a physical heaviness. I just knew it was wrong to ignore someone in such need, however busy I was, and my steps got slower and slower. Eventually, I stopped in my tracks and turned round. He was still there. I went back and sat with him for a while. He came round, he came to consciousness. We talked, we managed to connect with someone that he knew, and he found somewhere safe to stay that afternoon. I'm not pretending here I was some sort of hero. It's exactly the opposite. I didn't care. I did not care. As simple as that. But even when I had walked on, I couldn't get rid of this annoying voice within me. I think it was the voice of conscience. And our moral conscience in the Christian understanding calls us to do good and to avoid evil, to do the right thing, even when we don't want to, and to avoid what is wrong, even when we don't want to. Conscience is not just a feeling or an instinct. It's like an understanding or an inner voice. It speaks to our freedom. It connects us with the goodness and love of God. We have a duty to follow our conscience. If we don't, something within us can never settle. We might pretend that everything is fine, but there is an inner conflict. We lose our spiritual peace and our integrity. This is partly why last week I was speaking about the joy and peace that comes from making a good confession and living finally by your conscience. So we have a duty to follow conscience, but we also have a duty to form our conscience and to grow in virtue. Most of us, all of us, we inherit a lot of assumptions and prejudices. We pick up a lot of bad habits along the way. So we need to deepen our understanding of what is truly right and wrong, and not assume we've got everything sussed. For a Christian, for us, this involves prayer and listening to the Holy Spirit. It involves studying the Bible and learning about the teaching of the Church and trying to put that teaching into practice. Why? Because conscience is not just my inner voice. It's an openness to the truth, wherever that can be found. It's an openness to Jesus Christ for us as Christians, who is the way, the truth and the life. St. Thomas More gave a great example of following conscience, whatever the cost. As most of you know, he was a lawyer and scholar in the 16th century and became England's most senior politician. But he came into conflict with King Henry VIII over the question of divorce and the unity of the Church. Many of his friends encouraged him to agree with the king. He tried to find a compromise, but he felt he couldn't swear to something or sign something if he believed it was untrue. He couldn't betray his conscience. So King Henry eventually had him executed in the Tower of London. The truth is such an important value, and one that is so often devalued today. There is so much fake news in the media, and we can all become very casual about the truth in this atmosphere. We cut corners and tell white lies, and sometimes we get tangled up in the most terrible lies, personally and politically. Christian teaching is very clear and simple, and it follows the 10 commandments of the Bible. You must not bear false witness against your neighbour. You must not bear false witness against your neighbour. It is wrong to lie. We're called to seek the truth and to speak truthfully. Now, that doesn't mean that in every situation we are obligated to share the whole truth. It depends on the circumstances, and not everyone has a right to know what we are thinking, but we must avoid outright lies. Sometimes the truth requires us to speak up at great cost. Saint Oscar Romero was a priest in El Salvador who had a great love for Christ and for the Church. Through the 1970s, he became more and more aware of the hardship of the poor and the violence of the government security forces. In 1977, Romero was chosen to be Archbishop of San Salvador. The political conflict intensified. There was electoral fraud, torture, government-sponsored death squads. Archbishop Romero became the voice of the voiceless. He spoke out against the killings and the injustice from the cathedral pulpit and kept speaking even when the death threats multiplied. On the 24th of March 1980, Romero was shot and killed while he was celebrating Mass in his cathedral. He was a martyr for truth, for justice, and for conscience. I hope that I will never have to face the horror that Oscar Romero faced. But I do hope that I would have the same love that motivated him, the same passion for truth and justice, and the same willingness, if and when the moment comes, to stand up for my conscience and for the truth.